Hello, and welcome to the Khayrallah Center for Lebanese Diaspora Studies. My name is Dr. Akram Khatir. I'm a professor of history at North Carolina State University, and I'm the director of the Khayrallah Center. Today, we have the privilege and pleasure of speaking with Zayn Alexander, who is a co-winner of the 2020 Khayrallah Prize. Today, we will be speaking to him about his life journey, his career as a filmmaker, and specifically about the film for which he won the prize abroad, as it is called in English. And then we'll also talk a little bit about his future projects. Zayn, thank you so much for being with us today. It's a pleasure to have you here, and congratulations again on winning the 2020 Khayrallah Prize, being a co-winner this year.
Thank you, Akram. The pleasure is mine. Thank you so much.
So let's start out by talking a little bit about, again, your own life, your own journey as an immigrant, as a person who, born in Lebanon, I assume. So tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. I was born and raised in Saida, a small town outside of Beirut in southern Lebanon. I was born into a family with no artists. So, there are no artists in my family. So going into this field was sort of very alien to me, very far. And so, it was just a normal life, in a southern city. I went to Rafiq Hariri High School, where I studied, and then I went to American University of Beirut after I graduated high school, and I majored in psychology. And that was my ticket to actually, come to New York and study at Columbia University, where I did a master's in psychology as well. And so that was nutshell, pretty sort of basic. My life prior to moving here was pretty basic and boring. But yeah.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your childhood. I know you said that you are a pioneering artist in your family, and that you went to Rafiq Hariri School. So first of all, let's put it in a time frame, not to date you, but what years are we talking about that you went to high school?
Sure. I graduated high school in 2007. That's when I graduated. Yeah, and then that's when I went to college, and I graduated AUB in 2010. So, yeah.
So clearly, Lebanon is a place that is unfortunately full of a lot of tensions and conflicts. And 2007, finishing high school, meant that in 2006, you experienced the Israeli bombardment of Lebanon and the war between Israel and Hezbollah. And by 2007, the Arab Spring is exploding throughout the Middle East, all across the map of the Middle East. So there are a lot of swirling political things. And I'm kind of curious, as you were growing up in South Lebanon in particular, which has bore the brunt in many ways over the years of this kind of tensions between Israel and various Lebanese elements and Palestinian elements in Lebanon. What it was like to grow up in Saida. Saida is, a wonderful ancient city, a city that, of course, lies a bit in the shadow of Beirut as a capital, but nonetheless has its own heritage and culture. So if you can possibly talk a little bit about what it was like to grow up in this kind of environment.
Sure. I mean, a lot of family time. That's a small town Saida, a lot of family time, extended family relatives. Yes, Lebanon is sort of, at this point, we're just sort of used to the conflict, and it's not something that I cherish saying that we're used to it, but we grew up in conflict. And I think the assassination of our Prime Minister Rafiq Hariri in 2005 was sort of, I think I was, at the time, I was mature enough to understand politically how politics and that sort of security lapse, I guess, in Lebanon affected or was affecting our daily lives, and still is. My family is still in Lebanon, and so it is not, it's not something that you look back on and think, oh, that would just incorporate itself into our daily lives. We would just live with the conflict and live with everything that's happening and the chaos, and then we spent a lot of family time, and that was really it. And I think, in every family, there is almost one member of each family that is living abroad, because that is the situation. Unfortunately, that is the reality. And, nobody ever sets out to be an immigrant. Nobody ever sets out to leave their home and and their family and their friends and whatnot. But sometimes the circumstances, they force you to go and pursue something for yourself that you don't think is available to you in your home country, and that's unfortunate. So I guess the in 2005 onwards, I was very much I was picking up on all those cues that there is no future for me here, and that was unfortunate because the series of assassination attempts and that followed up until 2010 and even further. So
Well, I think what you just said, a lot of Lebanese appreciate exactly the sentiment you just voiced, is that
mhm,
many of us were forced to leave rather than
mhm.
necessarily that was our first choice. But before we get you on a plane and heading to New York,
I always seem to jump the hoop.
no, 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 it's quite all right. It's quite all
Yeah,
right. Listen,
yeah,
trust me, I completely appreciate that. But I'm kind of curious a little bit about because I want to get a little bit at how you ultimately become a filmmaker. And you said,
sure.
again, at the beginning, you said you're the only kind of artistically inclined individual within at least your
Mhm,
immediate, perhaps extended family. But I'm kind of
mhm,
curious about what some of the early influences you saw in terms of filmmaking specifically, but art in general.
sure. No, I mean, I was always the theatrical one in the family. I was always the person that was sort of, my dad was like, oh, he's the weirdo. He's the, the person that kind of stands out. And there was always this sort of pressure to just sort of contain myself and stop being so theatrical and so out there. But I always loved cinema, and I always loved entertainment and storytelling in general. And I've always had the inclination to pursue it and want to do it. But again, it wasn't in my family, so it wasn't even something that I was even allowed to think about. But growing up, it was a lot of movies and a lot of cinema, and of course, as I got older, as I matured, I started appreciating more, the cinematic aspects and the filmmaking aspects and storytelling aspects about, revered filmmakers and established filmmakers and whatnot. And and that's when, and I've always, people would ask me, extended families and during Eid and during a lot of family celebrations, so what do you want to be when you grow up? And it was always, oh, a doctor or a filmmaker. And everybody's like, oh, and I never quite understood what that meant, this, whether it was kind of a joke or they were sort of looking down on the arts. But yeah, it wasn't even an option. My dad wanted me to grow up to be a doctor, surgeon specifically. And yeah, and when you're young and you don't know what you want, and you don't get to experience that many different options, you just think that this is what I have to do because everybody else is telling you this is what you have to do. And of course, it's a small town, and being an engineer, being a doctor, being in business, I guess those are the only three options that anybody's allowed to pursue, whether you're suitable for these jobs or not. So I'm the youngest of three, and I guess I'm slightly rebellious in my family and stubborn, and much to the disappointment of my father. So I ended up sort of uh, uh, when I went to college, I was actually pre-med the first semester, and that's when, I don't mean to jump hoops again, but stop me if I'm going further than I wanted to. So yeah, I was pre-med the first semester of college, and that's when I realized this is really not for me. This is not what I want to do the rest of my life. And so I transferred to psychology because that was the field that interested me on an amateurish level, but I wanted to explore it further. I was always interested in people and behavior and emotions and in cognition, and so I transferred to psychology, and that was a great decision. I learned a great deal, made a great life for myself at the American University of Beirut, and that was my ticket to come to New York. And then I got on the plane, and that was not easy, and came to Columbia. And again, the first semester, actually the first couple of months, I realized, okay, this is not what I want to do with the rest of my life. I have a huge appreciation to this field, but this is not where I feel alive. And it sort of, and then it sort of, I connected the dots. Doing something that made me feel alive is watching cinema, and being theatrical as well. I loved acting, and I loved the feeling, watching a great performance, watching a great movie. I always wanted to be the person that made people feel that way. I wanted to be on the screen or on the stage or behind the camera that told a story to people and made them feel alive or made them feel something. And I remember going back to my dorm and and sort of sitting in the quiet and thinking, okay, what do I want? You know, what is it? What is the thing that's going to make me feel alive? And you know, being in New York City, with so many resources, so many options, and you just go online and you know, I googled acting class for actors with no experience. That's literally what I searched for, and a ton of, you know, a ton of options came up, and that's when things started sort of shaping themselves, to sort of to lead me in that direction. And so yeah, I took my first acting class, and that's when I knew, okay, this is what I want to do with the rest of my life. And that's when I started sort of pulling back from academia a little bit and going into the arts very slowly. So
I have to say I have a great deal of empathy and sympathy for the trajectory you just outlined, because of course I'm a bit older than you, Zain, but when I left Lebanon much earlier than you did,
mhm,
almost 30 years actually, uh, I also went to be an engineer, and you know, because that's those
mhm,
are the options: engineer or doctor, to be a respectable Lebanese young man. And then of course my
mhm.
trajectory took me. I did finish, but then ultimately ended up doing something else. But
Yeah.
I'll talk about films that you saw in Lebanon as kind of part of the formative experience of how cinema becomes an important aspect of your identity, as well
Mhm,
as you know, your very much your life work. Uh, but I want to
mhm.
get to the moment when you got on that plane, because I think that's a very powerful moment for a lot of people. Uh,
Mhm.
and I'm just kind of curious if you can describe that for us a little bit. This kind of departure, both in terms of the mechanics of it, in terms of who was there, and perhaps a little bit of the feelings that it engendered as you were getting on that plane.
Sure. Um, I think senior year of college, I just wanted to leave. I just didn't know why. I didn't feel like I didn't feel I was able to. I felt like I was sleepwalking through my days. You know, there was nothing that I was looking forward to, and that feeling in itself was pushing me to just leave further and further. And I just wanted to leave. I remember, and I think on the flight, um, here it hit me. Okay, I'm about to leave my family and about to leave the only place I know, for God knows, you know, how long. And so that's when I remember I broke down, and the woman next to me was like, "Are you okay?" I was like, "Yeah, I think I'll be fine." And so, but it was not an easy decision, knowing that you'll be so far away from my family and the only people that you know, and you get to spend all this time away from them, and you know, and leaving them in a place that's so unstable and so unpredictable. So that was not easy.
Yeah, yeah, I completely appreciate that actually. Uh,
Yeah.
so you started taking acting classes
Mhm.
while you were at Columbia doing your master's. Did you continue doing your master's in psychology, I assume?
I did. Yes, I finished my degree and I graduated in 2012. Yeah.
Okay. Mabruk on that.
Mhm.
But
Thank you.
but I'm sort of curious. You started taking these acting classes, and so what was the experience like?
Mhm. I mean, at first, definitely intimidating because I just didn't know what it was. I didn't know what acting was, and whether there was something that I had to do to, you know, outside of my body to sort of, you know, find this thing called acting. But I remember just watching. I audited the class, and I just remembered watching everybody else, and I said, "Oh, I can do what they're doing," and that's when things sort of made sense, you know. And you know, I was, you know, being mentored by really wonderful people, and still till this very day, who don't tell me things I want to hear. You know, it's just it's very important, I think, going into this to know whether you have something raw that you can offer, a certain level of skill, a base level of skill that you can offer, and then sort of build from that, be it technique, be it a more specific voice as a storyteller, as an actor, as a director. So that's, you know, I really, to me, working on building my confidence, it was very important because I, you know, it's just you're in a film set and there's 40 people behind the camera, and you're expected to be someone else, and you're expected to say, be off, memorizing lines that don't sort of belong to you and belong to different characters. And to me, building that confidence over the course of 2-3 years when I first started doing this was very important. So.
And so what was the first acting that you did in New York? I mean, what was the first, was it a play? Was it a film?
I remember the first sort of, role that I booked was for a short film called The Defector. It was, and it was, it was a role that was not necessarily an Arabic role. It was a sort of, the character's name was Mike, and he was an FBI rookie. He was interrogating this North Korean defector, and it was, this kind of procedural dramatic film. And and that was my first, dense, legitimate sort of role that I did. And that was early on, actually, the first year that I started auditioning and acting. And I did start auditioning in New York, didn't know what that was. I would go into an audition room, and sometimes I would stand there and I would just blank out, and sometimes I'd leave, and sometimes and this was one of the moments where I actually booked something that was a lot of fun. And then it sort of went on, and I guess I signed with my first agent, John Shea, and I started being seen for a lot of television stuff in New York as an actor. But unfortunately, I was only seen as, since my resume said Arabic speaker, that was the only thing that I would be seen for. I would go in for all those Middle Eastern roles, and a lot of them thick accent, a lot of them are stereotypical. They're the terrorists. At the time, I think it was 2012 or 2013, diversity was not the topic that it is now. It was not a dominating issue. We hear words today like diversity and inclusion writers and diverse storytelling, but at the time, I guess it was just starting out. But and that was that was frustrating after some time, because I would go into the room, and then casting directors would go, they would tilt their heads and like, "You're Arab, you're like, you don't look and sound like the stereotype that we have in mind for you." And after, I guess, tens of these auditions, I said, they kept telling me, "We don't know where to place you." And I said, "You know what, I'll tell you where to place me." And that's when I went ahead, and Abroad came from all that frustration. So.
What a very eloquent story, because it's true. I mean, at the time, you started around, it is about the 10th anniversary almost of 9/11, and Hollywood was reminding us over and over again that the only thing Middle Easterners could be is babbling people whose language has nothing to do with the culture and civilization that extends a couple of thousand years, but just violent extremism. So I can appreciate that became a part for you. So I'm going to come back to Abroad in a little bit and talk a little bit about the filmmaking process and this amazing script that, from what I understand, if I'm not mistaken, you did it in one night. You wrote the script.
Well, a lot of, Pascal, my wonderful writer and co-star in the film, she, we work together a lot, and we get along as people, we get along as, artists. And the script was sort of a process over the course of 6 months, but there were some last minute changes with the location that forced us to make a lot of changes over the course of one night. But no, it was, obviously a process over the course of 6 months to. Yeah.
So with this notion, I'm kind of curious, because where you start out your career as an artist is that you're trying to get a role in somebody else's film, and then where you're hitting these walls over and over again of stereotypes and limited one-dimensional vision of these characters. Then you switch, so you are behind the lens to a certain extent, I assume. That you are now taking charge of what the filmmaking is going to do. Had you had any experience in essence in that side of the filmmaking process until then?
Prior to Abroad?
Yeah.
No, not at all. The thing is, I going into this as a filmmaker, I knew I always wanted to direct. Directing was always a passion of mine, as was acting, still is. But I didn't think that I was going to do it now at this stage of my life. I thought I was going to be an actor strictly for hire for at least 10 years, learn a great deal about making movies on set, shadowing great directors, but that didn't come about. Nobody, as an actor, I struggled to find those roles and nobody seemed to know where to place me. And so I told myself, okay, it's fine if you didn't go to film school. You can see, how to tell a story. You want to tell a story, and just, muster that confidence and step behind the camera and learn as you go. Just make that movie, just tell that story. And that's what I wanted to do. But the thing is, what was so wonderful about that film, about that experience, is that it really started out as, Pascal and I wanted to create footage for our reels. We wanted to see what we can do for ourselves as actors as well, playing dense characters, telling a story that we think is worth telling. And then the film sort of flew on its own. And it was just, up until now, that this in itself is such a huge validation for the fact that that film came from a very personal place, but also from the heart. And it's incredibly validating to see it sort of, have that kind of shelf life.
Yeah, at the risk of sounding rather cliche, because one runs out of adjectives after a while when talking about this, and it's certainly, filmmaking is not my métier by any stretch of the imagination. What I think was very striking about Abroad is its genuineness and authenticity. I mean, there was just nothing artificial about the conversation, about the acting, certainly, the script, obviously, and the filmmaking itself. There was just a very natural notion that certainly within the selection committee for the Khayrallah Prize, evoked a lot of emotive response that was, that this felt real. You spoke about, and again, we'll speak a little bit more in detail in a bit, but about some of the real issues that immigrants encounter, about in terms of relationship with each other, in terms of relationship with home, which is very critical. And I think that was a very important aspect of the film, is that Lebanon was never too far off the lens. It's there. It plays a role. It's almost as an actor within the whole thing, obviously through your family or the family of the main character. But before we get deeper and deeper into the film, which I want to sort of go back to your family, because you talked about, again, being almost like the black sheep of the family, in which people were either sarcastically or sardonically were kind of evaluating, surgeon, filmmaker, and your father, to a certain extent, was very frustrated. So I'm kind of curious, as you started your career down this road, with all of its ups and downs and dead ends and what have you, how has the family reacted to this, dramatic shift in more than
this
one
is this is a fun story. So I kept everybody in the dark. I didn't tell anybody what I was doing until Abroad had its screening in Lebanon. And that was kind of they knew. I mean, when I first started acting, I tested the waters a little bit. I started throwing little seeds here and there to see how everybody would react. And there was a massive pushback. I was like, no, and so I decided that if I were to ever do this, I cannot tell anybody. I just cannot. And I have to be focused, and I can't have that type of energy interfere with my journey, because I knew that I had to be all in. I can't be 1 foot in, 1 foot out. And I don't think this is an industry where you can be 1 foot in, 1 foot out. And so I did a whole bunch of student films. I did a whole bunch of training. And then Abroad came about. And that's when, I was extended an invitation by the Lebanese Film Festival, who accepted the film. And I decided that was a chance for me to go to Lebanon after, I think, 5 or 6 years of just being gone. And to tell everybody that, oh, by the way, this is what I'm doing. And my mother's incredibly supportive, and I actually was very shocked to see how many people were supportive. Old friends of mine who came to the screening were very excited, because I didn't think that would be the case. My father is still struggling with with this. He would just nod and not say anything. So it's a process.
Which year was this when you went back to Lebanon for the Lebanese Film Festival?
2018.
2018, so a couple of years ago. And
Mhm.
where was the film screened? Which in Beirut?
In Beirut, yeah, Lebanese Film Festival. Yeah.
Okay. And so what was the reaction of the audience? I'm kind of curious because here's an audience that is of Lebanese, mostly stayed in Lebanon.
It was, it was because the audience sort of was a mix, between obviously art house, cinema audience, film students and whatnot, and then there was sort of the mainstream audience, like my family and extended family, who are not really used to short films. In Lebanon, we have the telenovelas and we have the Turkish soap operas, and there's like 300 episodes, and so they're not really used to a 10-minute film. So it was, it was sort of, some people really liked it and really spoke to them, and some people wished it was a bit longer, which was also great, and some people just, I guess, didn't understand what short films were, and that's fine. But things are changing now, so
Of course, of course.
yeah.
Um, so given that the film was screened there, and going back to sort of what you were hoping to tell, the story you were hoping to tell in this film, I was wondering if you can begin to explore that for us a little bit in the storytelling, this kind of film storytelling.
Mhm. Sure. So Pascal and I met doing a play here in New York for a theater company called Behind the Seas, which is a Mediterranean theater company. And we met, we grew really close, and we decided that we were going to work together and tell a story that is sort of reflects our struggles as, Middle Eastern actors trying to navigate this industry. And we started, we got together, and then, Pascal had a bunch of drafts, and it was always about a couple trying to cope with family pressure from overseas. And as the script progressed, it was natural that we incorporate what we did for a living as artists, because we experienced a bunch of funny audition situations. In itself felt like a sketch, felt like, this was something that you could talk about and write about, because it's funny in itself, and to actually have in a script. And that's sort of where the film came about. And the opening scene, I guess, in the film was, I knew it was going to be the subject of controversy, not subject, but, whoever sees it in the theater, especially on a big screen, is going to think, okay, we know what we're in for. This is a woman who's fully covered up in a burqa, and does this look like some sort of hostage video and whatnot? And then as the film progressed, I guess the unpredictability in that film is what, lingered with audiences, what resonated so much. And so, yeah, this was sort of the genesis of the project.
I mean, I think in many ways also that, especially for the Lebanese, but I suspect for a lot of other ethnic immigrants, we
Mhm.
always like to tell triumphalist stories in which we come, we work hard, we succeed, everything is great. But in this film,
Mhm.
you are not shy about the frustrations of immigration, about the notion that immigrants can hit walls, can quote unquote fail, although that's a very subjective notion. I suppose people measure it by money and power, but certainly they can hit a lot of obstacles, and sometimes those
Mhm.
obstacles can become so overwhelming, so that the main character, the male character in your film, decides, I
Mhm.
cannot do this anymore. I've got to go back. So that's one of the element that was so genuine about
Mhm.
that. So what made you go raw like that? I mean, because again, there's a tendency to want to create a little pastiche.
Absolutely. There is a tendency with immigrant stories to have a bit of veneer over the, especially when it comes to gender stereotypes. I mean, usually it's the women that would ask for stability in kids and a home. And we really wanted to play with those stereotypes. We wanted to see this male protagonist sort of uh, facing that reality, that okay, things might not turn the way that I expected them to in the past, and now it's a moment of reckoning. And so we really wanted to play with those gender stereotypes, and it's not easy. It's really not easy being an immigrant, a Lebanese immigrant, B, and a Lebanese immigrant and a Lebanese artist at the same time, trying to again navigate these waters where stereotypes are rampant. And we don't, we're all so different. We come from, Arabs in general, in where there's so much nuance in our own identities that we don't see that in casting here. I mean, I've been on so many different casting calls where I would ask, "Do you speak Urdu?" And I'm like, "No, I don't speak." It's just like, so it's I don't know what that is, but we really wanted to add contribute to this conversation of nuance when it comes to diversity and being an Arab and being Lebanese and being an immigrant, and shed light on, a lot of people in Lebanon, they told me, "Oh, we didn't know it was that difficult. We thought, oh, of going to New York to be an actor, or being director, whatnot. Oh, it's just the glamorous life." So, no, and that's also something that we wanted to highlight in the film.
And I think you did it absolutely beautifully, especially the gender angle too, which I think was very powerful. The moment during the dinner, I think they were having dinner, in which
Hmm.
you can see that that distance that had closed with the ring begins to open up very quickly in a conversation about feminism, about women's choices, men's choices. Uh, where the main female character is critiquing the bourgeois mentality that is coming through
Hmm.
about, idyllic kind of life, married
Yeah.
life, and then her putting back the ring in that drawer, which I have to say was incredibly powerful. And then she goes back to casting woman in burqa. I mean, just
Yeah.
really, really kind of a very
Hmm.
poetic. I mean, I think this was poetry, honestly.
Mm.
It was.
Thank you.
It's not a novel, but it's a poem that was really quite well done. So it's just quite remarkable in many ways.
Thank you.
Uh,
Appreciate
oh, thank you, actually. So,
it.
and in that sense, then, where do you see then at this point? I'm going to ask you two related questions. One, uh,
Mm.
obviously, there's an element of autobiography in this film, as you said. So, were you at any moment ready to give up? I mean, I know I'm maybe asking a very obvious question because perhaps the answer is yes, but I'm kind of curious as if there are indeed such moments in your own career and what they were, but more importantly now, where are you yourself going in your career after this kind of turning point, perhaps?
Um, I mean, it wouldn't be normal to not experience moments of vulnerabilities in this career and desperation and frustration. This is not an easy career choice. A lot of people want to do this. It's very congested. But at the end of the day, if you truly believe that this is what you love to do and that you're believing your drive and your hard work, then opportunity will knock on your door. It's a matter of clinging to that passion, clinging to that persistence. But I've never had this sort of um, I want to give up thought or feeling. No, but there have definitely been moments of vulnerabilities. And I'm sorry, what was your other question?
So the second question is related to that. Uh, after this film, where do you see yourself going in
Mhm.
terms of filmmaking? I mean, what are in essence
So after
aspirations and plans?
so after Abroad, I was lucky enough to again work with Pascal on another film, Manara, which is touring right now, and so that also did very well, and I'm very happy with the response that it has received. And now I'm working on my future projects. So that in itself, I mean, there's always you know um, you always have to keep going. You always have to have another project in the works. So thankfully, that's happening. I'm writing my first feature film and also writing a series project. So we'll see what happens. We'll see. Yeah.
So I'm kind of curious also in terms of your future projects because
Hmm.
clearly Lebanese film and Lebanese television, very much like music. You have mainstream pop telenovela, as you describe them, uh,
Hmm.
over dramatized, quite cliche series one after the next. Uh,
Hmm.
but at the same time, you have this counterculture in Lebanon that is incredibly vibrant, incredibly brilliant in many ways, whether it's music or filmmaking. So I'm kind of curious if you see for yourself a role in shaping a new type of Lebanese cinema.
I hope so. I really do. I think that culture has a lot to offer in terms of stories, but a lot of it, unfortunately, is being reduced to. I mean, I don't know if I'm the best judge because I don't really follow what's happening on the television front, for example. But I do know that there's a great deal of independent movies and art house films, and that are sort of being made by incredibly talented people, young filmmakers as well, and are doing very well overseas. So I don't know. I really hope. I think there needs to be, I guess, on a mainstream level, if you're talking about mainstream television or mainstream local cinema, I think if we, on the writing front, if we focus on issues that resemble us, that are, that reflect our day-to-day lives, because in every home, in every household, with every family, there is an issue to explore. And I do think there needs to be, I don't know if it's from the top down or the bottom up, but we focus so much on beauty in Lebanon. If we have beautiful actors to look at, that's enough. And I don't think that's enough. And I think the audience deserves better, to sort of reduce the audience's palette to, if they're looking at beautiful actors and that's enough for them. I disagree with that wholeheartedly. So.
Well, I mean, that's a valid critique for many forms of art, unfortunately, in Lebanon. So abroad, and I think in Manara as well, where what's really interesting is the transnational nature of your filmmaking. That is, as I said earlier, yeah, you're talking about, I mean, well, and abroad, let's focus on that. You're talking about a couple that are in New York, struggling actors trying to make ends meet. But at the same time, Lebanon as an actor in the form of the mother of the male character, and the business of the family business as well, is not too far off screen. It's actually part of the script, but Lebanon looms large, including this notion of going back home, so to speak. And I'm kind of curious, is that as you sort of working on your craft, working on your creative aspect of your craft, to you, your experiences in Lebanon come through and in the storytelling to you as part of, is that a conscious thing, or is it just simply as part of, the reality that you live?
Both, I would say. There's something that something about the culture. I mean, I was in Lebanon for 18 years. That's quite a bit of time. All those memories and all those experiences shape you up. Mold you. They shape who you become. And there's some things that you cannot escape. And so, be it the family pressure to be a certain thing or a certain way. And, in abroad, we tackle family pressure to get married. We tackle family pressure to take over the family's business. It's a very, what's the word that I'm looking for? Family is a very important entity in Lebanon, And so no matter how far you go, that nest finds a way to bring you back, be it through expectations, be it through pressure to become a certain way. And that's what we tackle in abroad. In Manara, we tackle, obsession with appearances amongst Lebanese families. And that's, that is something that was rampant. And I think till this very day, with very small communities, how other people perceive us is more important than how we perceive each other. And that's important. That to me, I felt that it needed to be addressed. This has something to do, I mean, right now, everybody's talking about mental health. That's a trending topic today, but at the time, nobody talked about trauma, nobody talked about mental health, and nobody talked about how family dynamics and those kinds of communication style within the family shape your mental state as you grow up, and how you cope and resolve conflicts and whatnot. So I really wanted to shed light on that, how that affects who you become. So.
Do you envision at some point in the future, and this is a hard question to answer, I recognize, but because we all ask ourselves that at one point or another as immigrants, do you envision returning to Lebanon and kind of cocoon of a family, so to speak?
Right now with COVID, it's sort of like 24 hours. I can't think past 24 hours, but nobody ever wants to be an immigrant, and nobody ever wants to be a refugee. I'd love to be with my family, and I'd love to. I think something about just to sort of talk about it a little bit. My generation, I think, because we were born right after the war, and between, and right before an ongoing series of conflicts. There is that sort of sense of belonging that we don't have. At least for me, I don't. I don't know if I do understand what patriotism means, what having an identity to one's country means. I mean, I used to, when I first came to this country, I was so jealous of how patriotic people are. They cheer their teams in sports, and they have this sort of this loyalty to the flag and loyalty to the land. And I feel like I didn't get to experience that because there was so much conflict and so much instability. And so I would love to go back one day and, feel that sense of belonging, identity, and patriotism. But I mean, we truly deserve better as Lebanese people than what we have today in terms of political leadership. So I hope they're gone at some point.
Yeah, and I mean, again, I think that's I'm a bit of an older generation than you, so the Civil War is something that I went through myself, and I think it's what you're saying about your generation. One could easily say about, in fact, I was just having a conversation with a group of friends who came to the United States around the same time in the late 70s, early 80s, and that notion of belonging was quite disrupted. Our childhood, our belonging, so to speak, and the very city that embodied, Lebanon was kind of being destroyed around us. So there is that notion that makes it very difficult, and almost makes it that we have a love-hate relationship with Lebanon, so to speak. But I'm kind of curious to kind of wrap up this line of conversation, is kind of what you were talking about in some ways for a lot of people in Lebanon and abroad. August 4th explosion in the port of Beirut, this kind of catastrophic destruction of one of the main arteries of communications and transportation in Lebanon, but more importantly, stands as a symbol of the absolute malfeasance and ineptitude of a government that has kind of let things, fall apart. And for a lot of people, it was truly, I mean, aside from the physical trauma, of course, which is real, there's a lot of psychological trauma in which they felt like Lebanon was completely gone. I'm kind of curious if that's something how did that impact you first? And if that's something that you think you would go back to as a subject matter, because for a lot of Lebanese, this was a turning point.
I mean, it still is. In what, 7 months, 8 months,
Right.
8 months after the fact, we still don't have accountability. Nobody's resigned. Judges are being allocated left and right. There's one thing to be numb to the situation, and it's another thing to just think about your family and your friends and all your loved ones who are still there. And I mean, I don't know what to make of this situation, to be honest. And I try to watch the news, but at the same time, I try not to, because I know what to expect. I know what to expect. And a lot of my friends, some of them have left, some of them. You're right, it was a turning point, and some of them feel hopeless and helpless, and it's not, be it the economy, be it the pandemic, and be it what's happening with the dollar and the local currency. It's just, I mean, where do you start? I talk to my parents, and I try to lift them up, and they do the same for me. But they tell me, I had this conversation with my mom. She told me, you cannot be down, because you have to lift us up. It cannot be the other way around. And obviously, it was very difficult when the situation happened. I mean, being so far away, you feel so helpless. You want to be there, you want to help, you want to be on the ground. You feel. I really, it's not an experience that I can vocalize in any way that can make sense. It's just very tragic.
Zayn, we are so grateful for you for being here with us today. And I want to congratulate you again on winning the 2020, being a co-winner of the 2020 Khayrallah Prize. It was a joy to watch the film, and it's an incredible testament to your ability, as well as Pascal's, who's off screen, obviously, with us. And I wish we would have had an opportunity to speak with her as well, to your ability as filmmaker. And we wish you all the best in your future endeavors. And we hope to see you again sometime soon on some sort of event with the Khayrallah Center.
I hope so. Thank you so much. And I just want to say that this in itself is incredibly validating. I'm incredibly honored because it was really, I've been here for almost 10 years, over 10 years. It hasn't been an easy journey, and to see it be acknowledged in this way, especially for this film. So I'm very humbled and flattered. So thank you so much.
Oh, you are most welcome. And it's a pleasure to get to meet you in person at last. Have a good day.
Likewise.